Vivian barely had time to steady the two overstuffed trash bags before her father pulled the front door open wider. "Don't leave them on the porch," Richard Brooks said evenly. "They're your responsibility now." She stared at him, stunned. "You're serious?" "You wanted to be treated like an adult," her mother, Denise, replied from behind him. "Adults pay their own way." "I have been paying." Her younger brother, Kyle, leaned against the hallway wall with a grin that made her stomach tighten. Not enough, apparently. Vivian looked past them into the dining room. The Thanksgiving table was already set. Turkey rested under foil. Candles were lit. Her favorite serving bowl, the one Grandma Alina always used, sat in the middle of the table as if nothing unusual was happening. "You can't throw me out on Thanksgiving morning," she said quietly. Richard folded his arms. "We're not throwing you out." He nodded toward the bags. "We're encouraging your independence." Denise picked up Vivian's winter coat and dropped it on top of the luggage. "You've depended on us long enough." Vivian laughed once, more out of disbelief than humor. "I've paid every bill you've asked me to pay." Her father didn't blink. "And yet this house is for family." Kyle smirked before adding the final insult. "Enjoy starting from nothing." The words landed harder than the cold November air waiting outside. Vivian searched each of their faces, hoping someone would crack, apologize, admit this had gone too far. No one did. Instead, Richard quietly closed the front door behind her. The lock clicked. For several seconds, Vivian simply stood on the front walkway with her belongings at her feet, while neighbors drove past on their way to family dinners. She had spent nearly 8 years helping her parents financially. Whenever the mortgage was tight, she covered it. When the furnace failed, she paid the repair company. When Kyle dropped out of college and needed another chance, she helped with tuition because Denise insisted. He's still finding himself. Every request came wrapped in the same sentence. Families help each other. Vivian had believed it. She worked as a senior financial compliance analyst at a regional bank, earning a comfortable salary, yet somehow she always felt one emergency away from falling behind. Every raise seemed to disappear into another family crisis. Only now was she realizing those crises had almost never belonged to her. She loaded the bags into her aging sedan without knowing where to go. As she reached for the last cardboard box, something slid against the side. Inside were a few photo albums, her grandmother Alina's reading glasses, and an unopened cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in Alina's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 simple words. "Only Vivian may present this in person." Nothing else. No explanation. No address beyond the familiar logo embossed in the corner. It belonged to the small credit union Alina had trusted for decades. Vivian looked back at the house one last time. Through the dining room window, she could see everyone taking their seats for Thanksgiving dinner. No one came outside. She started the engine and drove straight to the credit union. The branch was nearly empty because of the holiday. An older manager welcomed her into his office after reading the envelope. He unfolded the letter once, twice. Then his eyes widened. Without saying another word, he turned toward his computer, typed rapidly, and froze at the screen. His expression changed completely. He stood, walked to the office door, quietly locked it, and returned to his chair. Then he looked directly at Vivian. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "please have a seat." He took a slow breath. "We need to discuss something that should never have happened." Vivian sat down slowly, her hands still wrapped around her grandmother's envelope. The branch manager rested both palms on his desk, studying her for a moment before speaking. "My name is Harold Simmons," he said. "Before I answer any questions, I need to ask you a few." Vivian nodded. "When did your grandmother pass away?" "Almost 3 years ago." "And where have you been living since then?" "I stayed with my parents for a while." She hesitated. "Then they helped me find a condo to rent." Harold's eyebrows lifted slightly. They found it for you. Yes. They told me it belonged to a family friend, an investor who preferred to stay out of the day-to-day management. He made another note. And you've rented the same condo ever since. Yes. Have you renewed the lease? Twice. Have you ever met the owner? Vivian frowned. No, everything went through a property management company. Harold leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more guarded. I see. He turned his monitor slightly away from her and entered another series of credentials. A message appeared on the screen, prompting him for additional authorization. After another login, a list of trust files appeared. Most were locked. Several displayed red restrictions. One file contained Alina Brooks' name. Harold looked back at Vivian. I'm going to need your driver's license. She handed it over without asking why. Now I'll need 3 signatures. He slid several forms across the desk. What are these? They authorize me to confirm your identity and request access to restricted trust records. Vivian signed where he indicated. Harold scanned the paperwork immediately. I still can't open everything, he admitted after another attempt. Some documents require authorization from the trust attorney. The trust attorney? Yes. Vivian blinked. My parents told me there wasn't a trust. Harold didn't answer. Instead, he closed the screen and folded his hands. I can't speculate until the records are released. The silence in the room stretched. Vivian looked down at the envelope her grandmother had sealed years earlier. I don't understand. Harold's voice softened. Tell me about your grandmother. A small smile appeared despite everything. Grandma Alina never forgot birthdays. She remembered Alina baking cinnamon rolls every Christmas morning. She remembered afternoons spent balancing her checkbook at the kitchen table, while Alina patiently explained why every dollar should have a purpose. Most of all, she remembered the promise Alina made whenever life at home became difficult. You'll always have a place to come home to, sweetheart. At the time, Vivian thought she meant emotionally. Now those words echoed differently. After Alina's funeral, Richard had gathered everyone in the living room. The estate's basically gone, he'd announced matter-of-factly. The medical bills took almost everything. Denise had sighed dramatically. There really isn't anything to divide. Kyle had shrugged, as though it barely mattered. Vivian never questioned it. She had trusted them. A different memory surfaced. 6 months after moving into the condo, the rent increased. When she complained, Denise immediately defended the landlord. Property taxes are up everywhere. The following year, another increase. Richard simply said, You're lucky they didn't raise it more. Every explanation had sounded reasonable. Because it came from her parents. Harold interrupted her thoughts. When is your next rent payment due? In 2 days. He nodded slowly. I've already contacted the attorney who administers restricted trust matters for this credit union. You have. He'll make time for you today. Vivian leaned forward. Mr. Simmons. He met her eyes. Is something wrong? He chose his words carefully. I don't know yet. It wasn't the answer she wanted. But it wasn't a denial either. Harold stood and gathered the paperwork into a secure folder. I'll have my assistant schedule your appointment. As Vivian reached the office door, Harold spoke one final time. Ms. Brooks. She turned. Have you ever actually met your landlord? She opened her mouth, then stopped. Every lease renewal had arrived electronically. Maintenance requests were handled through a call center. Rent was automatically withdrawn each month. Not once had she ever met the person who supposedly owned the condo. She walked out of the credit union with one question repeating in her mind. If she'd never met the owner, who had she really been paying every month? Vivian drove away from the credit union, with Harold's question replaying in her head. Have you ever actually met your landlord? She tried to come up with a simple answer that would make the situation seem ordinary. Maybe the owner lived overseas. Maybe they owned dozens of properties. Maybe the management company handled everything. Each explanation sounded reasonable for a few seconds. Then another thought would erase it. Why had Harold looked so disturbed? By late afternoon, the Brooks house was full. Cars lined both sides of the street. Laughter drifted from the backyard, while children chased one another across the lawn. Inside, Richard carved the turkey like the morning's confrontation had never happened. Denise moved from guest to guest, wearing the same warm smile she always saved for company. Oh, Vivian finally decided to get her own place, she told an aunt as she poured cider. We've been helping her become independent. Another relative nodded approvingly. That must be expensive these days. Richard smiled modestly. It is. But family takes care of family. Vivian stopped just inside the front door, unnoticed for a moment. She had only returned because the trust attorney's assistant had called while she was driving. The attorney needed the names of Aliner's immediate family members before releasing additional trust documents. Some of that information was in an old family Bible still kept in the house. She had no intention of staying for dinner. Then she heard her father continue. We've practically subsidized her housing for years. Several relatives looked impressed. That's generous, one uncle said. Denise sighed dramatically. We've always worried about Vivian. She's a wonderful daughter, but she's never been good with money. The words hit harder than being thrown out. Vivian had spent years helping them financially. Now they were telling everyone the exact opposite. She stepped fully into the dining room. I'm looking for the old family Bible. Every conversation stopped. Richard's smile disappeared. I thought we made ourselves clear this morning. I'll be gone in 5 minutes. Kyle leaned back in his chair. Couldn't afford movers already. A few relatives laughed awkwardly before realizing Vivian wasn't smiling. She looked directly at her father. Dad. What? What's the name of my landlord? The room fell strangely quiet. Richard blinked. What kind of question is that? The owner of my condo. You've paid rent there for almost 3 years. I know. So what's the owner's name? Denise answered before Richard could. Why does that matter? I just want the name. Richard reached for his glass. The management company handles everything. That's not what I asked. Kyle rolled his eyes. Seriously, who memorizes their landlord's name? Vivian didn't look away from her parents. You recommended the condo. You negotiated the lease. You said the owner was an old family friend. So tell me who it is. For the first time all day, neither Richard nor Denise answered immediately. Richard cleared his throat. I don't remember. Vivian noticed something she had never seen before. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. Her phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed the trust attorney's office. Excuse me. She stepped onto the back patio before answering. Ms. Brooks, the attorney said. This is Michael Carter. I've reviewed the preliminary trust records. Vivian gripped the railing. What did you find? I can confirm one important fact. She waited. The condo you've been renting. He paused just long enough to make her heartbeat quicken. Has never changed ownership since your grandmother's trust was established. Vivian frowned. So Grandma's trust still owns it. That is what the property records currently indicate. Then who inherited it? I'm not prepared to answer that. Why not? Because one group of documents is still being authenticated. I won't speculate until I have every piece of evidence. His tone became firmer. But I do need one thing from you. What? Do not discuss this investigation with anyone. Vivian slowly turned toward the dining room window. Inside, she could see her parents watching her. Not casually. Carefully. Almost anxiously. For the first time since arriving, she realized they weren't acting confident anymore. They were waiting. Waiting to learn what she knew. She ended the call and walked back inside. Richard stood before she reached the table. Everything all right? His voice sounded calm. His face did not. Vivian slipped the family Bible into her bag. It will be. Without another word, she walked toward the front door. Nobody tried to stop her. Nobody asked why she suddenly seemed so certain. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from attorney Michael Carter. The message contained only one sentence. Do not make another rent payment until further notice. Vivian read the email 3 more times before putting her phone down. Do not make another rent payment until further notice. The instruction seemed simple. Following it felt impossible. For nearly 3 years, she had never missed a payment. Rent was due in 48 hours, and every instinct told her to avoid creating another problem. She spent that night staring at the scheduled automatic withdrawal on her banking app. Her finger hovered over the confirmation screen. Then she remembered Harold Simmons' expression. Something that should never have happened. She took a deep breath. Instead of approving the payment, she canceled the automatic transfer. The confirmation message appeared. Scheduled payment canceled. It was the first time she had ever intentionally missed rent. The consequences came much faster than she expected. The following morning, her phone rang while she was at work. A caller identified herself as a representative from Brookstone Residential Management. Ms. Brooks, our records show your rent payment has not been received. I'm aware. Will you be submitting payment today? My attorney has instructed me not to. There was a brief silence. I'm sorry, your attorney. Yes. I'll make a note of that. The representative ended the call without another question. Less than an hour later, an email arrived marked urgent asterisk. It warned of late fees. By lunchtime, a second email threatened legal action if payment was not received immediately. Before the workday ended, a third message stated that eviction proceedings would begin if the balance remained unpaid. Vivian forwarded every message directly to Michael Carter. His reply came within minutes. Do not respond. Let them continue. The next afternoon, Vivian sat across from Michael in his conference room. A stack of property records covered the table. He slid one document toward her. This is Brookstone Residential Management. She glanced at the company registration. They manage my building. They do. Michael placed a second document beside it. This is the company that owns Brookstone. The names were different. Different addresses. Different filing dates. They're connected, Vivian said. They are. A third file appeared. This LLC owns the holding company. Vivian leaned closer. So who owns this one? Michael opened the final folder. This is where the structure ends. She looked at the registered director. For several seconds, the name refused to make sense. Then her chest tightened. Richard Brooks. My father. Michael nodded. The property management company reports to a holding company. That holding company reports to another LLC. And according to the Secretary of State's filings, your father is the registered director. Vivian slowly sat back in her chair. No. Every rent payment. Every late fee. Every annual increase. Every automatic withdrawal. They hadn't been going to a stranger. They had been going to her father. Michael pulled another folder from his briefcase. There's more. He handed her certified banking records. The rental account ultimately deposited funds into the LLC. She followed the transactions line by line. Month after month. Year after year. Every payment matched her bank statements perfectly. She whispered, "They collected every dollar." They did. And because they used multiple corporate entities, it wasn't obvious where the money ended up. Vivian covered her mouth. Her parents hadn't simply lied. They had built an entire business structure to hide where her money was going. Michael reached for the thickest folder on the table. This arrived from the credit union this morning. Across the front was a gold seal. Certified trust documents. "The restrictions have finally been lifted," he said. "You can open it." Vivian carefully broke the seal. Inside were copies of the original trust agreement. Property records. Transfer documents. Her grandmother's signature. She turned each page slowly until she reached the schedule listing the trust assets. There was the condo's address. She kept reading. Then she found the beneficiary designation. Her own name. Vivian Brooks. She stopped breathing for a moment. Her voice failed. Michael gave her time. "The property has legally belonged to you since the trust became effective." "So," she looked up, tears filling her eyes. "I've been paying rent. It's on my own condo." Michael nodded quietly. "Yes." Before she could absorb another word, her phone lit up. "Dad calling." She stared at the screen. After a long pause, she answered. Richard didn't bother with a greeting. "You have exactly 24 hours to pay your rent." The line went silent. Vivian lowered the phone from her ear without answering. Richard had already ended the call. She looked across the conference table at Michael Carter, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand what had happened. "He still thinks I don't know," she said quietly. Michael closed the trust folder. "That call tells me exactly what I needed to hear." "What do you mean?" "If your father believed this was a simple misunderstanding, he would have asked questions." Michael leaned forward. "Instead, he demanded money. He still believes he has the right to collect rent from you." Vivian stared at the certified trust documents lying in front of her. For almost 3 years, she had apologized for being late on rent twice after unexpected car repairs. She had skipped vacations. She had delayed replacing her aging car. She had worked overtime to keep up with increases she thought were unavoidable. All because she believed she owed someone else for the privilege of living there. Her grandmother had been trying to give her security. Her parents had turned that gift into a source of income. Over the next several weeks, everything moved far faster than Vivian expected. Michael filed emergency motions to preserve the trust assets before any ownership records could be altered. The credit union produced Elinor Brooks' original trust documents, complete with notarized signatures and property transfer records dating back years before her death. The paperwork was unmistakable. Elinor had legally transferred the condo into an irrevocable trust while she was still alive. The beneficiary had always been Vivian. The trust instructions specifically required the credit union to release certain documents only if Vivian appeared in person with the sealed authorization letter Elinor had left behind. Without that letter, the restricted files remained locked. Elinor had anticipated that someone might interfere after her death. She had quietly built a safeguard. The envelope Vivian nearly left sitting in a cardboard box became the key that unlocked everything. Financial investigators began tracing the rent payments. What initially appeared to be a routine property management company quickly unraveled. Brookstone Residential Management collected the rent. Its revenue flowed into a holding company. The holding company transferred profits into another LLC. That final company was directed by Richard Brooks. Every monthly payment Vivian had made could be followed through the corporate records. The money had never gone to an unrelated investor. It had been routed directly into a business controlled by her parents. Investigators also documented the annual rent increases. Each increase had been approved internally by the same network of companies Richard controlled. There had never been an independent landlord making those decisions. Richard and Denise had simply decided Vivian would pay more. Then they told her property taxes had gone up. The truth spread through the family much faster than either of Vivian's parents expected. Relatives who had praised Richard and Denise for helping, Vivian now learned that the story had been reversed. It wasn't Vivian who had depended on her parents. It was her parents who had depended on Vivian's money. Her aunt called first. I had no idea. Neither did her uncle. Nor did the family friend who had silently watched Vivian carry trash bags to her car on Thanksgiving morning. One by one, people reached out. Some apologized. Some admitted they should have questioned the stories Richard and Denise had repeated for years. Kyle was the last to understand. When the investigators explained where the money funding his lifestyle had come from, his confidence disappeared. The financial support he had taken for granted vanished with the companies that had provided it. The legal process took several months, but the outcome never changed. The trust's ownership was confirmed. Vivian's lease was declared invalid because she had never been a lawful tenant. She had always been the owner. The court recognized the rent collected from her as part of the broader financial wrongdoing